Hey, this is Tony from the Cold Case Project, where we focus on unsolved cases across the United States. Our mission is to bring attention to these unresolved mysteries that need your help. All the information we cover in these cases is readily available on the internet, but we rewrite and repurpose it for the purpose of these videos. Our goal is to spread the word about the thousands of unsolved cold cases still out there. Thank you for watching. If you want to help shed light on these cases, make sure to like and subscribe for more content. Your support can make a difference.
Jennifer Long was last seen on the morning of January 22, 1998, at East High School in Kansas City, Missouri. She was a sophomore at the time and had attended her first 2 morning classes before getting into an argument with other students. Upset, Jennifer left campus around 9:30 a.m. That morning, she was seen at a nearby grocery store where she met Wesley Ira Perkey, a local handyman who had been in the area for a plumbing job interview. Witnesses saw Jennifer getting into Perkey's white 1989 Ford pickup truck, and from that moment on, she was never seen again. Initially, authorities considered the possibility that Jennifer had left on her own. Her home life had been unstable, and she had only recently transferred from Ruskin High School to East High School, where she reportedly felt unsafe. However, her family strongly disputed the idea that she would have run away. Jennifer had been looking forward to taking her driver's license test and had no known plans to leave home. Over time, her case was reclassified as an abduction rather than a voluntary disappearance. In December 1998, while Perkey was in jail awaiting trial for the brutal murder of an elderly woman, he confessed to killing Jennifer. Perkey had an extensive criminal record, a history of drug and alcohol abuse, and a reputation for violence. In his confession, he claimed that he would assist investigators in recovering Jennifer's remains, but only if he was transferred from a state prison to a federal prison. Authorities charged Perkey with Jennifer's murder in October 2001. According to his own statements, he forcibly abducted Jennifer and took her to his home in Lansing, Kansas. There, he admitted to assaulting and killing her. He described a horrifying scene in which he disposed of her body, burned the remains in a fireplace, and later disposed of what was left in a septic pond. To support his claims, Perkey led authorities to locations where he claimed he had discarded Jennifer's jawbone and undergarments, but despite extensive searches, nothing was ever recovered. In 2003, Perkey stood trial for Jennifer's murder. During the penalty phase of his trial, he changed his story, admitting that he had killed Jennifer, but insisting that she had willingly gone to his home. He claimed that his earlier statements about kidnapping her were lies, meant to ensure that the case would be prosecuted in federal court. Despite this attempt to downplay the crime, the jury found him guilty, and he was sentenced to death. Before his sentence was formally handed down, Perkey addressed Jennifer's father, offering an apology for what he had done. However, his remorse did little to change the outcome of the case. After years of legal battles and appeals, Perkey was executed by lethal injection in July 2020, marking the first federal execution since 2003. Despite Perkey's conviction and execution, Jennifer's body has never been found. In January 2004, a report surfaced claiming that Jennifer's remains had been located, but this turned out to be false, leaving her case officially unresolved. More than 2 decades later, Jennifer remains classified as a missing person. Beverly Logan was last seen on January 27, 2022, inside a trailer located on Ross Lane in Belleville, Illinois, where she lived with a man. After that day, she seemingly vanished without a trace. There have been no confirmed sightings or communications from her since. Her family, who found it unusual for her to be out of touch for more than a few days at a time, reported her missing on February 13, 2022. Prior to this report, Beverly's cellular phone pinged off towers in Bellflower, Missouri, and High Hill, Missouri, on February 5 and February 9, respectively. These locations are both situated along Interstate 70, approximately 70 to 80 miles west of St. Louis, Missouri. However, it remains unclear whether Beverly herself was in those areas at the time or if her phone had been moved without her. The discovery of these pings added another layer of mystery to her disappearance. In April 2022, authorities uncovered some of Beverly's personal belongings inside a house in Bellflower, Missouri. This discovery raised further concerns about her whereabouts, but unfortunately, there was still no sign of Beverly herself. Adding to the mystery, her car, a blue 2019 Nissan Versa with Alabama license plate number 2CH1060, was also missing. As investigators worked on her case, they found that Beverly's car had been sold by someone other than her to a buyer in the St. Louis, Missouri area. From there, the vehicle changed hands multiple times, complicating the search efforts. Despite these leads, law enforcement was unable to locate the car, and it was eventually reported as stolen. The involvement of a third party in the sale of Beverly's vehicle raised red flags for investigators, as it suggested that someone else may have had access to her property and potentially played a role in her disappearance. By June 2022, the case took another twist when police attempted to take a man named Charles L. Story into custody in Bellflower, Missouri. Story had several outstanding warrants for his arrest out of Illinois, but law enforcement also wanted to question him about Beverly's disappearance, given his presence in the area where her belongings were found. When authorities approached him, Story barricaded himself inside a room and refused to surrender, claiming he was armed. He then threatened to shoot anyone who tried to arrest him before turning the gun on himself. After a tense standoff, Story eventually exited the room and was taken into custody without further incident. However, he required medical attention for a gunshot wound to the leg that he had sustained a few days prior. Despite the suspicious circumstances, Story has not been officially named as a suspect in Beverly's case. Authorities have not disclosed what, if any, information he provided during questioning, leaving many unanswered questions about his potential connection to Beverly's disappearance. The circumstances surrounding Beverly's case remain murky. With her personal belongings found in Bellflower, her phone pinging in multiple locations after she was last seen, and her car being sold under questionable circumstances, there are strong indications that foul play may be involved. However, law enforcement has yet to publicly identify any suspects or persons of interest beyond seeking to question Story. Echo Lloyd vanished on Mother's Day, May 10, 2020, under highly suspicious circumstances, leaving her family desperate for answers in a case that has seen little media attention or law enforcement urgency. Echo, a 48-year-old mother of four, had only lived in Edwards, Missouri, for 7 months after an amicable split from her longtime husband, Tony, who was still financially supporting her. Shortly after moving, she developed a romantic connection with her neighbor, Josh, who lived just 0.2 miles away. But over time, she began to feel he was moving too fast and invading her space. She had even planned to tell him to back off the very weekend she disappeared. The last confirmed sighting of Echo was on May 9, 2020, when she and Josh were seen together at Walmart. That same day, she visited a dollar store, where an employee recalled her acting nervous and mentioning that her ex was draining her bank account, a strange statement given that Tony was still helping her financially. On Mother's Day, her daughter, Kelsey Smith, drove to her mother's house to drop off flowers and a card, but found it locked, her car missing, and no sign of Echo. Assuming she was out, Kelsey left the gift behind and went home. Days passed with no response from Echo, and when Kelsey returned on May 15th, she found the car now in the driveway, the house still locked, and Echo still missing. Desperate, Kelsey broke in through a window and was immediately struck by the unsettling scene inside. Food left out, covered in mold, trash piling up, and Echo's wallet, purse, and cigarettes untouched in her bedroom, with money still inside, ruling out robbery. Growing increasingly alarmed, Kelsey confronted Josh at his home, where she discovered Echo's keys and medication in his basement. As she was leaving, she found one of her mother's cell phones in his driveway, and when she picked it up, Josh aggressively snatched it from her, claiming Echo had given it to him. Adding to the list of strange occurrences, another man, Mac, had been seen with Echo that weekend. Mac had a criminal history, including a connection to a murder where his brother took the fall, and he was known for his involvement in illegal activities. With these two men in the picture, the circumstances surrounding Echo's disappearance grew even more unsettling. Kelsey reported her mother missing on May 15th, and law enforcement conducted a search of her property the next day, but it was minimal, lacking tracking dogs, and seemingly without urgency. Even more frustratingly, law enforcement has never released crucial details such as what Echo was wearing the day she vanished, Walmart security footage from that day, or any official statements regarding suspects. The Missouri State Highway Patrol took over the case in August 2020, but progress has been non-existent. The lack of media attention has only made things worse, leaving Echo's family and community to search on their own. Despite multiple efforts to push for more coverage, news outlets have largely ignored her case. Echo Lloyd was a mother, a friend, and a person who mattered, and someone out there knows something. Whether it was Josh, Mac, or someone else entirely, someone is keeping secrets. Until those secrets come to light, Echo Lloyd remains missing, and her family remains without answers. If you have any information regarding the disappearance of Echo Michelle Lloyd, please contact the Missouri State Highway Patrol or the Benton County Sheriff's Office. On the evening of October 3, 2011, in a quiet Kansas City neighborhood, 10-month-old Lisa Irwin was tucked into her crib by her mother, Deborah Bradley. The baby was surrounded by her favorite comfort items, a pacifier, a soft blanket, and a few toys. It was a routine night in the Irwin Bradley household, but by the next morning, everything would change. Lisa would vanish without a trace, leaving behind a trail of unanswered questions and a community in shock. Deborah Bradley, Lisa's mother, had spent the evening caring for her 3 children, Lisa and her 2 older half-brothers, who were asleep in another room. Deborah later admitted that she had consumed several glasses of wine that night and had taken prescription medication for anxiety, which left her feeling drowsy and disoriented. She last saw Lisa at either 6:40 p.m. or 10:30 p.m. accounts differ, and this inconsistency would later become a point of contention in the investigation. Lisa's father, Jeremy Irwin, an electrician, returned home from work around 4 a.m. On October 4th, what he found was every parent's worst nightmare. The house was eerily altered. Several lights were on, the front door was unlocked, and Lisa's bedroom window was wide open. Most chilling of all, Lisa was gone. Her crib was empty, and 3 cell phones were missing from the home. Panicked, Jeremy and Deborah called 911 to report their daughter's disappearance. The Kansas City Police Department launched an extensive search of the area, but no trace of Lisa was found. The circumstances of her disappearance were puzzling. How could a baby vanish from her crib in the middle of the night without a sound? The open window and unlocked door suggested the possibility of an intruder, but there were no signs of forced entry or struggle. The missing cell phones added another layer of mystery. Were they taken to prevent the family from calling for help, or was there another reason? Almost immediately, the investigation turned its focus on Lisa's parents. Deborah and Jeremy were subjected to intense scrutiny, and authorities noted that they were less than cooperative during the initial stages of the investigation. Deborah, in particular, faced criticism for her behavior. She admitted to being intoxicated on the night Lisa disappeared, which raised questions about her ability to recall events accurately. Additionally, her inconsistent statements about the timeline of that evening further fueled suspicion. Jeremy and Deborah denied any involvement in their daughter's disappearance, but the media and public opinion were quick to cast doubt. The couple's personal lives were dissected in the press. At the time of Lisa's disappearance, Deborah was still legally married to another man, though they had been separated for years. Her husband, who was serving in the Army, publicly stated that he did not believe Deborah was capable of harming Lisa or being involved in her disappearance. Despite this, the cloud of suspicion lingered. 3 separate witnesses reported seeing a man walking down a road about 3 miles from Lisa's home in the early hours of October 4th. The man was described as carrying a baby dressed only in a diaper. While these sightings were intriguing, investigators were unable to confirm whether they were connected to Lisa's case. The descriptions of the man varied. and no concrete evidence linked him to the disappearance. Another lead emerged when a cadaver dog allegedly detected the scent of human remains in Deborah and Jeremy's home. However, no physical evidence was found to support this claim, and the significance of the dog's alert remains unclear. The family's attorney dismissed the findings, arguing that the dog's alert could have been triggered by any number of factors and did not prove foul play. Over the years, several theories have emerged about what might have happened to Lisa Irwin. One theory suggests that she was abducted by someone who wanted to raise a child of their own. This idea is supported by the fact that Lisa was taken from her crib without any obvious signs of struggle, as if the abductor had been careful not to wake her or alert the household. Another theory posits that Lisa's disappearance was the result of a custody dispute or personal vendetta. However, no evidence has surfaced to support this idea, and both Deborah and Jeremy have maintained that they have no knowledge of anyone who would want to harm their daughter. A more controversial theory involves the possibility of an accidental death followed by a cover-up. Some have speculated that Lisa may have died as a result of an accident or neglect, and her parents disposed of her body to avoid legal consequences. However, this theory remains purely speculative, as no evidence has ever been found to support it. Despite extensive efforts by law enforcement and the community, the investigation into Lisa's disappearance has yielded few answers. Her case remains open, and no suspects have been named. Over the years, there have been occasional tips and leads, but none have led to a breakthrough. Lisa's parents have continued to plead for information about their daughter's whereabouts. They have maintained their innocence and expressed frustration with the way the investigation was handled, particularly the focus on them as potential suspects. In the years since Lisa's disappearance, they have worked to keep her case in the public eye, hoping that someone will come forward with information that could solve the mystery. The disappearance of Lisa Irwin has left a lasting impact on the Kansas City community. Hundreds of volunteers joined the search for the missing baby in the days and weeks following her disappearance, but their efforts were in vain. The case has been featured on numerous television programs and podcasts, keeping Lisa's story alive in the hopes that new information will emerge. For Lisa's family, the pain of not knowing what happened to their daughter is unimaginable. Jeremy and Deborah have faced unimaginable scrutiny and heartbreak, but they have never given up hope that one day they will find answers. Lisa would be 14 years old today, and her family continues to wonder what her life might have been like. Who took her? Why? And where is she now? The disappearance of Amanda K. Jones on August 14, 2005, remains one of the most haunting and unresolved mysteries in Hillsborough, Missouri. Amanda, a 26-year-old mother who was 8 months pregnant with her second child, vanished without a trace after meeting Brian Westfall, the father of her unborn child, at the Civic Center in Hillsborough. Her mother, Bertha Proch, has spent nearly 2 decades searching for answers, clinging to the hope that one day she will find out what happened to her daughter and unborn grandchild. The last time Bertha spoke to Amanda was on the morning of her disappearance. Amanda had called her mother before church, sounding unusually happy. She shared that Brian Westfall had reached out to her that morning, wanting to meet at the Civic Center after church. They planned to have lunch at a nearby restaurant called Off the Hook in DeSoto. Amanda left her 4-year-old daughter, Hannah, with Bertha and her husband, promising to return later. That was the last time anyone in her family saw or heard from her. The day had started with hope. Amanda believed Brian might finally take responsibility for the pregnancy. Their relationship had been strained since she told him she was pregnant. Brian had urged her to have an abortion, but Amanda refused. Her young daughter, Hannah, had even stood up to Brian, telling him, "You're not going to hurt my baby." After that confrontation, Amanda had little contact with Brian until the day she disappeared. According to Brian's account, he met Amanda at the Civic Center around 1 p.m. He claimed they spoke briefly before he left to run errands. When he returned 3 hours later, he said Amanda's car was still there, but she was nowhere to be found. Later, he changed his story, saying he came back at 5 p.m. and saw Amanda sitting in her car. Bertha finds this account impossible to believe. No pregnant woman would sit in a car on a hot August day in Missouri without air conditioning, she says firmly. It doesn't make sense. Amanda's last known phone call was around 12:15 p.m. to her sister-in-law, Rhonda. During the call, Amanda seemed rushed and distracted. She kept saying, "I think it's 8-8, Bertha explains. At the time, there was a gate numbered 8 at the Civic Center. Bertha believes Amanda was trying to give Rhonda a clue about her location. It seemed like she couldn't give too much information, Bertha says. Like she was trying to hint at something. The investigation into Amanda's disappearance began immediately, but it was fraught with inconsistencies and dead ends. The Hillsborough Police Department initially took the case, but it was soon handed over to the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office. Brian Westfall was the primary person of interest, but he was never formally charged. He claimed he had no involvement in Amanda's disappearance and even called Bertha's house twice on the day Amanda went missing, speaking to her husband and the police. During one of these calls, Brian told the officer that Amanda's car was still at the Civic Center, but he didn't know where she was. Despite these calls, Bertha and her family found Brian's behavior suspicious. He made no effort to help search for Amanda, even though she was carrying his unborn child. He didn't ask for a DNA test, Bertha says. He just offered her money to get an abortion. Why would you do that if you weren't involved? The Sheriff's Department conducted searches of the Civic Center and surrounding areas, but no trace of Amanda was found. In 2019, they conducted another search, this time using advanced technology, but again, they came up empty-handed. Over the years, rumors and theories have swirled about what might have happened to Amanda. Some believe she was the victim of foul play, while others speculate that she may have left voluntarily, a theory Bertha vehemently rejects. Amanda would never have walked away, she says. She was about to have a baby. Her whole life revolved around her daughter, Hannah. They were like two peas in a pod. Bertha believes Brian Westfall is responsible for Amanda's disappearance. I think he killed her, she says. Whether it was premeditated or an accident, I believe he buried her on his property. Brian's brother reportedly told Bertha that he believed Brian was involved, but was too afraid to come forward. He said Brian's sister is very mean and he was scared of her, Bertha explains. But he wouldn't speak to the authorities. Despite these allegations, no concrete evidence has ever been found to link Brian to Amanda's disappearance. The emotional toll on Bertha and her family has been immense. It's been very difficult, she says. It has really taken a toll on our lives. The heartbreak never goes away, no matter how many years it's been. For Bertha, the pain is compounded by the fact that she not only lost her daughter, but also her unborn grandchild. It's one thing to lose a child and be able to mourn them and bury them, she says. But it's something else to lose a child and not know what happened. Bertha often thinks about the life Amanda could have had. She would have been a wonderful mother to two beautiful children, she says. Instead, we're left with this void, this endless questioning. Amanda's daughter, Hannah, is now an adult, and Bertha sees her daughter in her every day. She talks just like her mother, acts like her mother, and looks like her mother, Bertha says. It's bittersweet. I'm so proud of the woman Hannah has become, but it's a constant reminder of what we lost. Bertha hopes that by sharing Amanda's story, she can keep her daughter's memory alive and perhaps even generate new leads. I believe someone out there knows what happened, she says. I just hope they find the courage to come forward. The case of Amanda K. Jones remains open, but with each passing year, the chances of finding answers grow slimmer. For Bertha, however, the search for justice is far from over. I will never stop fighting for Amanda, she says. Not until the day I find out what happened to her and can finally put her to rest. Crystal Kipper disappeared in the early morning hours of February 25, 1997, after what should have been a routine drive home from St. Joseph, Missouri, to Kansas City. She had driven to St. Joseph the previous evening to pick up a friend, and the two spent the night ice skating. At around 1 a.m., while driving her friend back to St. Joseph, the low-fuel warning light in her red 1989 Ford Probe X came on. Despite this, Crystal refused to stop for gas, insisting that her car always had good mileage and that she could make it back to Kansas City without refueling. Her family later stated that she had a habit of running out of gas and had previously used her AAA Auto Club membership multiple times to get roadside assistance. After dropping off her friend at approximately 2 a.m., Crystal promised to call him when she got home, estimating that she would arrive by 3 o'clock a.m. Her friend fell asleep while waiting for her call, never realizing that something had gone terribly wrong. Sometime after 2:30 a.m., it appears that Crystal's car did, in fact, run out of gas while she was driving on Interstate 29, just north of the Kansas City International Airport. A truck driver reported seeing a young woman, matching Crystal's description, flagging down cars on the southbound shoulder of the highway at approximately 2:34 a.m. The witness also noticed another vehicle backing up on the exit ramp toward the woman's stalled car. This would be the last confirmed sighting of Crystal Kipper. Later that morning, Crystal's mother found her abandoned Ford Probe on Interstate 29. The hazard lights were still on, but the battery was nearly dead. There were no signs of Crystal anywhere near the scene. Her disappearance immediately raised concerns, as it was unlike her to simply vanish. Investigators launched a search, but the case would take a dark turn later that year when police linked a known sex offender to her case. In 1997, authorities searched the Kansas City home of John E. Williams, a convicted sex offender who had recently been implicated in the abduction and sexual assault of another Missouri woman. Inside his home, they found disturbing evidence: Crystal's identification cards, a paycheck stub, her car keys, and the clothing she had last been seen wearing, including a mock turtleneck and jeans. DNA tests confirmed that the clothes belonged to Crystal, and investigators noted that the damage to the clothing was consistent with a homicide. Under questioning, Williams initially claimed that he had accidentally hit Crystal with his vehicle on Interstate 29 on the night of February 24th. Afraid of being implicated in a crime, he said, he panicked and disposed of her body. He refused to reveal where he had hidden her remains, but later led investigators to an area near Platte City, Missouri. Despite an extensive search, authorities found nothing. Further evidence suggested that Williams had been lying about how Crystal died. Investigators discovered that he had taken his car to get the windshield repaired the very next day after her disappearance. The damage was reportedly consistent with someone having kicked it, suggesting that there had been a struggle. Williams denied this, along with any claims that he had intentionally harmed Crystal. Still, multiple witnesses later came forward with information that they believed Crystal's body had been hidden in the woods of Platte County, but no remains were ever found. Authorities were preparing to charge Williams with Crystal's murder when, in April 1999, he committed suicide in his jail cell. He had been serving time for the abduction and rape of another Missouri woman, and his death left many unanswered questions about Crystal's fate. However, two of his former cellmates later came forward, stating that Williams had confessed to them that he had murdered Crystal and disposed of her body. Crystal had been working as an exotic dancer in Kansas City in 1996, but had made the decision to leave that life behind. At the time of her disappearance, she had secured a different job and was focused on moving forward with her life. Tragically, she never got the chance. More than 2 decades later, Crystal Kipper's case remains unsolved. Though it is widely believed that she was murdered by John Williams, the lack of physical evidence or a recovered body leaves an air of uncertainty. Her family continues to search for answers, hoping that someday they will find the closure they have been denied for so many years. The disappearance of Cheryl Kinney on February 27, 1991, is a chilling and unsolved mystery that continues to haunt her family, the community of Nevada, Missouri, and investigators to this day. Cheryl, a 32-year-old mother of 2, was last seen at her job at the Quality Convenience Store on Business 71 Highway in Nevada. Her case bears eerie similarities to the disappearances of Angela Hammond and Trudy Darby, 2 other Missouri women who vanished under suspicious circumstances around the same time. On the evening of February 27, 1991, Cheryl was working her usual shift at the Quality Convenience Store. It was a slow night, and she decided to close the store early. Her time card shows she clocked out at 10 p.m., and the store alarm was set at 10:17 p.m. After that, Cheryl was never seen or heard from again. Her white Chevrolet was found abandoned in the store parking lot, with no signs of a struggle or forced entry. The store's janitor, who left just minutes before Cheryl closed up, reported that there were no customers' cars in the parking lot when he departed. However, he did note that there was a male customer inside the store whom he didn't recognize. Walk-in customers weren't unusual, as there were several hotels within walking distance of the store. Despite this, the unidentified man has never been located, and it remains unclear whether he had any connection to Cheryl's disappearance. Because Cheryl closed the store before she vanished, it's unlikely that anyone was still inside when she left. Store policy prohibited her from letting anyone in after closing, making it improbable that she would have allowed someone to remain inside. However, 2 witnesses in the area reported hearing a woman scream around the time Cheryl would have been leaving the store and heading to her car. Tragically, these witnesses didn't come forward until several days later, after reading about Cheryl's disappearance in the newspapers. By then, valuable time had been lost, and any potential evidence or leads may have been compromised. Initially, authorities considered the possibility that Cheryl had left of her own accord. Her mother had recently passed away, and Cheryl was reportedly struggling with grief. However, this theory quickly fell apart under scrutiny. Cheryl was only carrying about $6 when she disappeared, making it highly unlikely that she could have started a new life elsewhere. Moreover, it would have been completely out of character for her to abandon her husband, her 2 young children, and her father, who was ill at the time. Cheryl was described as a devoted mother and wife, and her family insists that she would never have willingly left them behind. As the investigation progressed, Cheryl's case began to draw comparisons to 2 other high-profile disappearances in Missouri around the same time. On January 19, 1991, just 6 weeks before Cheryl vanished, Trudy Darby, a convenience store worker in Max Creek, Missouri, was abducted from her workplace. The store was robbed of $220, and Trudy's nude body was found 2 days later in the Little Niangua River. She had been shot twice in the head. Half-brothers Jesse Rush and Marvin Cheney were later convicted of Trudy's rape and murder, as well as the robbery. Then, on April 4, 1991, Angela Hammond, a 20-year-old pregnant woman, was abducted from a payphone in Clinton, Missouri, just 90 miles from Nevada. Angela's case also remains unsolved, and her disappearance has become one of Missouri's most infamous cold cases. The similarities between Cheryl's disappearance, Trudy's murder, and Angela's abduction are striking. All 3 women were last seen at or near convenience stores, and all 3 cases occurred within a few months of each other in rural Missouri. While there is no hard evidence to definitively link the cases, the parallels have led investigators to consider the possibility of a serial predator operating in the area at the time. However, without concrete proof, this theory remains speculative. Over the years, Cheryl's family has tirelessly advocated for answers, but the case has yielded few leads. Her husband, children, and father have been left to grapple with the pain of not knowing what happened to her. Cheryl's father, who was ill at the time of her disappearance, passed away without ever learning the truth about his daughter's fate. Her children, who were just 10 and 12 years old when she vanished, have grown up without their mother, carrying the weight of her absence throughout their lives. Cheryl's case remains open, and her family continues to hold out hope that one day they will find out what happened to her. "We just want closure," her family has said in interviews. "We want to know where she is and what happened to her. We want to bring her home." On the night of July 15, 1999, 12-year-old Heather Cullorn was babysitting a 2-month-old baby in a quiet apartment while the parents were away. It should have been an ordinary night, watching over the sleeping infant and making a little extra money. But by the early hours of the morning, Heather was gone, vanished without a trace. The only clues left behind were a blood-stained couch and the baby, left crying face down on the floor. For over 2 decades, Heather's case has remained an unsolved mystery, tangled in a web of secrets, drugs, and unanswered questions. How does a child simply disappear from a locked apartment in the middle of the night? And why have those closest to her seemingly taken their secrets to the grave? Heather Cullorn was, in many ways, an ordinary 12-year-old girl. She lived with her mother, Christine, and her 14-year-old brother, Matthew. Like many kids her age, She was going through a rebellious phase, experimenting with cigarettes, sneaking out, and spending time with an older crowd. She was searching for an identity, as many preteens do. Her mother, Christine, was a single parent who struggled to keep Heather in line. Their relationship was turbulent, but a recent diagnosis had brought them closer together. Heather had type 1 diabetes. She required 4 insulin shots per day, and her mother became her primary caregiver. The responsibility of monitoring her health forced Christine to be more present, and in turn, Heather started to appreciate her mother's love and care. Despite their struggles, Heather had a kind heart and a strong sense of independence. She wanted to earn her own money and had taken up babysitting to afford gifts for her family. That summer, she began babysitting for Dana Madden and Christopher Herbert, a couple she had grown close to. Heather spent so much time at their apartment that it became a second home. She even moved in with them for a month, seeing Dana as a big sister and Christopher as the closest thing to a father figure. But the more time she spent there, the more she was exposed to a dark underbelly of crime and addiction that would ultimately lead to her disappearance. On the night of July 15th, 1999, Dana Madden left for a late-night shift at a nearby convenience store around 10 p.m. Christopher was nowhere to be found. Heather was alone in the apartment with the couple's 2-month-old baby. Around 2 a.m., a neighbor walking his dog reported seeing a large man carrying a child over his shoulder. The child's legs were bare, and the upper body was covered with a blanket. The witness admitted he had poor eyesight and couldn't make out any defining features, but the sight was strange enough to stick with him. By 4 a.m., the baby's loud, desperate cries woke up the neighbors. They entered the apartment to find the front door unlocked and the infant lying face down on the floor. Heather was gone. Blood was found on the couch, later confirmed to be Heather's. Christopher arrived home at the same time the neighbors discovered the scene. He immediately called Dana, who then called the police. Authorities arrived at 5 a.m. and launched an extensive search. What they found, or rather, what they didn't find, would only deepen the mystery. As investigators dug deeper into Heather's disappearance, they uncovered something chilling. Dana and Christopher were not just a struggling couple. Christopher was involved in manufacturing methamphetamine, operating a hidden drug lab with a man named Mike Mason. Authorities searched the apartment complex and found a full-fledged meth lab in the garage. Mike Mason, a known associate of Christopher, had been in and out of the drug trade, often bringing over supplies and working on projects with Christopher. Suddenly, Heather's disappearance wasn't just about a missing child. It was tangled in a larger criminal operation. Authorities believed Heather may have seen or heard something she wasn't supposed to. Had she accidentally walked into the wrong room at the wrong time? Had she threatened to tell someone about what she witnessed? One prevailing theory emerged. Heather was abducted and killed to keep her quiet. Heather was young, but she wasn't naive. She had been around Christopher and Dana enough to see their lifestyle. She may have overheard conversations, seen the drugs being made, or even been warned to stay quiet about what she knew. Was she seen as a liability? One chilling possibility is that Heather was kidnapped and taken away by someone in their circle, either to silence her or for another, even more sinister reason. Another possibility is that Heather, being diabetic, may have been taken somewhere and deprived of her insulin. Without her medication, she would have quickly gone into a diabetic coma, leading to her death. If her abductors weren't aware of how serious her condition was, they may have disposed of her body, believing she had overdosed or simply died on her own. One disturbing clue supports this theory. Mike Mason, Christopher's associate, reported that the same night Heather went missing, someone broke into his car and stole 2 tow chains. He told police he believed whoever took Heather had also taken the chains to weigh her body down and dispose of it in the Mississippi River. Investigators searched parts of the river, but found nothing. However, the river is vast, with areas nearly impossible to search effectively. If Heather's body was dumped there, it may never be found. Christine Cullorn was relentless in her search for Heather. She never stopped asking questions, demanding answers, or pushing the police to keep looking. In April 2000, nearly a year after Heather's disappearance, Christine reached her breaking point. She stormed into Dana's workplace, wielding a baseball bat, screaming and demanding to know the truth. Desperate for answers, she was ready to take justice into her own hands. Dana never provided any new information. Despite the mounting suspicions surrounding Christopher, Dana, and their associates, no one was ever charged in connection to Heather's disappearance. In the years that followed, Christopher and Mike Mason were arrested on unrelated federal drug charges, but neither faced consequences for Heather's case. The police have stated that they have a suspect, but have never released the name to the public. Heather remains missing to this day. In 2017, Christine passed away without ever knowing what happened to her daughter. Her obituary listed Heather as one of her surviving children, a painful testament to the hope she held on to until her final days. Heather Cullorn would be in her late 30s today. Some believe Heather's case will never be solved, that the truth was buried long ago by people who knew exactly what happened, but have since disappeared into the shadows. Others hold on to hope that someone, somewhere, knows the truth and will come forward. A 12-year-old girl vanished in the dead of night, and decades later, the questions remain. Where is Heather? Who took her? And will she ever be found? The case of the Springfield Three is one of the most haunting and perplexing missing persons cases in U.S. history. On June 7, 1992, 19-year-old Suzanne Susie Streeter, her 47-year-old mother Cheryl Levitt, and Susie's best friend, 18-year-old Stacy McCall, mysteriously vanished from Cheryl's home at 1717 East Delmar Street in Springfield, Missouri. In the nearly 33 years since their disappearance, authorities have been unable to determine what happened to them, and no trace of the three women has ever been found. On the evening of June 6, 1992, Susie and Stacy were celebrating their high school graduation. They attended multiple parties throughout the night and were last seen at around 2 a.m. on June 7th. Initially, the two young women had planned to spend the night at their friend Janelle Kirby's house. However, when they arrived, they found that the house was too crowded with other guests and decided instead to go to Susie's home, where her mother, Cheryl, lived. Cheryl had last been heard from at approximately 11:15 p.m. On June 6th, when she had a phone conversation with a friend. Nothing seemed amiss at that time. Meanwhile, Susie and Stacy left Janelle's house and drove separately to Cheryl's home, arriving sometime after 2 a.m. What happened next remains a mystery. The following morning, Janelle became concerned when Susie and Stacy failed to show up for their planned trip to Whitewater, a popular water park. Janelle and her boyfriend drove to Cheryl's house to check on them. Upon arrival, they found something unsettling. Susie, Stacy, and Cheryl's cars were all in the driveway. Their purses, keys, and other personal belongings, including Cheryl's cigarettes, were inside the house. This was particularly strange because Cheryl was a chain smoker and never left the house without her cigarettes. The only sign of anything unusual was a broken porch light, which Janelle's boyfriend swept up, inadvertently tampering with what could have been evidence. The couple entered the home through the unlocked front door and were immediately greeted by Cheryl's Yorkshire Terrier, Cinnamon, who was behaving anxiously. Everything else inside the house appeared normal. There were no signs of forced entry, no struggle, and nothing seemed to be missing. Shortly after Janelle and her boyfriend left, Stacy's mother, Janice McCall, arrived at the house. Stacy had not called her, which was unusual, and she had grown worried. When she entered the home, she found the same eerie scene. 3 women missing, their belongings left behind, and no signs of a break-in or struggle. Like Janelle, she found Cheryl's cigarettes, and that was when she knew something was very wrong. When authorities arrived, they were faced with an extremely compromised crime scene. By the time police were notified, at least 10 to 20 people had already entered the home, contaminating any potential evidence. This severely hindered the investigation from the start. Investigators quickly determined that there were no signs of forced entry, and nothing of value had been taken from the home. However, the broken porch light was a potential clue. Some believe it could indicate a struggle, while others think it may have been a distraction. Adding to the mystery, while Janelle and Janice were at the house, they both received strange phone calls. The calls were described as sexually explicit and disturbing. When they answered, an unknown male voice made crude sexual remarks before hanging up. The same caller left a voicemail, but it was accidentally erased before police could listen to it. Despite these clues, investigators had little to go on. Searches of the surrounding area, including wooded areas, lakes, and quarries, turned up nothing. There were no credible sightings of the three women, no known enemies, and no ransom demands. One of the most well-known suspects in the case is Robert Craig Cox, a convicted criminal who was serving time in a Texas prison for armed robbery. Cox had a history of violence and had been convicted of a previous murder in Florida, though that conviction was later overturned due to a lack of evidence. Cox had lived in Springfield at the time of the women's disappearance and had been interviewed by police. His girlfriend at the time provided him with an alibi, but years later, she recanted, saying he had pressured her into lying for him. In 1997, while speaking to a journalist, Cox made a chilling statement. "I know that they are dead. I know where they're buried." Despite his claims, Cox refused to provide any further details. Authorities could never find enough evidence to connect him to the case, and Cox remains a person of interest to this day. In 2007, a crime reporter, Kathleen Baird, was contacted by a psychic who claimed that the Springfield Three were buried beneath the south parking garage of Cox Health Hospital. While many dismissed psychic tips, Baird decided to investigate. She contacted a geophysicist with ground-penetrating radar, and the two conducted a scan of the area. To their surprise, the radar picked up three distinct anomalies beneath the concrete that were consistent with grave-sized disturbances. Despite these findings, authorities refused to excavate the site, citing the enormous cost and lack of solid evidence. To this day, the parking garage remains untouched, and it is unknown if the bodies of the Springfield Three truly lie beneath it. The case remains unsolved due to several significant obstacles. 1. A compromised crime scene. The contamination of the house by multiple people before police arrived likely destroyed valuable evidence. 2. No witnesses. Despite living in a residential area, no one saw or heard anything unusual that night. 3. A lack of physical evidence. With no DNA, no fingerprints, and no confirmed suspect, police have struggled to make an arrest. 4. False leads. Over the years, numerous alleged sightings and tips have led nowhere. The families of Susie, Stacy, and Cheryl have never stopped searching for answers. In 1997, Susie and Cheryl were declared legally dead, though Stacy's parents still hold on to hope. Janice McCall, Stacy's mother, has remained vocal in the fight for answers. In an interview, she stated, "I truly believe that someone out there knows something. I just pray that someday they come forward." To this day, the case remains one of Springfield's greatest mysteries. The disappearance of the Springfield Three is a chilling case that continues to haunt the city of Springfield and true crime enthusiasts alike. How could three women disappear without a trace? Were they abducted by someone they knew? Or were they victims of a random crime? With no bodies, no solid leads, and no justice, the mystery endures. If anyone has any information about the case, they are urged to contact the Springfield Police Department at 864-1810. On the night of May 23, 1985, 16-year-old Jody Lee Ledkins vanished into the dark streets of Kansas City, Missouri. She had just called her mother, asking for a ride home, but never made it back. No one has seen or heard from her since. Was Jody a runaway who chose to disappear? Or did she meet a far more tragic fate? Decades later, her case remains one of Kansas City's most puzzling mysteries. Jody Ledkins was not a stranger to struggle. Growing up, she experienced a turbulent home life, often caught in the middle of conflict between her mother, Karen Stratton, and her father. At just 16, she was already involved with the juvenile probation system, trouble that stemmed from a minor incident involving a security guard and truancy issues. Despite these struggles, Jody was still just a normal teenage girl. She had a boyfriend, a group of friends, and a desire for independence. But on that fateful night in May, everything changed. That evening, Jody was at her boyfriend's house on Cambridge Street in Kansas City. Tension filled the air. An argument erupted between her her boyfriend, and some friends. They were going somewhere, but they refused to let Jody come along. Upset and frustrated, she left the house and walked to a friend's residence near East 14th Street and Winchester Avenue. At around 10 p.m., she called her mother, asking for a ride home to East Topping Street. But there was a problem. Karen didn't have a car at the time and couldn't pick Jody up. Jody reassured her mother that she had other friends who could drive her home. It was the last time they ever spoke. When Jody walked out of her friend's house, the friend assumed she was heading back to her boyfriend's place. But instead, Jody was last seen walking northbound on Winchester Street from 14th Street, alone, into the darkness. She was never seen again. Because she was in a juvenile probation program at the time, her caseworker filed 2 warrants listing Jody as an endangered juvenile. These warrants stated that if authorities spotted her, she should be detained, but no one officially reported her as a missing child. Karen assumed that her daughter was in the system as a missing person, but in reality, law enforcement had no idea she had disappeared. By the time police realized the truth, it was 1987, 2 years after Jody vanished. Any immediate clues had already faded, and her case was already cold before it even began. For years after Jody disappeared, an unexpected twist emerged. Her juvenile probation officer received a letter, one that claimed to be from Jody herself. In the letter, the writer stated that she was doing well, but wasn't ready to explain why she had left. Karen examined the letter, comparing the handwriting to one of Jody's past letters. She wasn't sure if it was the same or if it was just an elaborate hoax. Was Jody really alive, choosing to remain hidden? Or was this letter a cruel deception? If the letter left room for hope, what followed in the 1990s was far more disturbing. Between 1993 and 1995, nearly a decade after Jody vanished, Karen started receiving terrifying phone calls. The caller demanded money in exchange for Jody's safe return. At one point, they even made a horrifying threat. If you don't pay, we'll send Jody's body to you, in pieces. Karen recorded the calls and turned them over to the police. Investigators traced the calls to a Kansas City phone booth, but by the time they arrived, the caller was gone. The person behind the threats was never identified. Was it someone who truly knew what had happened to Jody? Or was it just a cruel hoax meant to torment a grieving mother? In 1997, a new lead surfaced when 2 prison inmates came forward with information about Jody's case. Authorities took their claims seriously and even dragged the Missouri River, searching for her remains. But once again, they found nothing. Still, the case was reclassified, no longer just a missing person, but a probable homicide. Jody's mother now lives in Arkansas, but she still returns to Kansas City every year, searching for answers. She acknowledges that Jody might have willingly left that night. She was unhappy at home, frustrated with her probation status, and surrounded by influences that could have led her to make a rash decision. But even if Jody left on her own, why has she never contacted her mother, her friends, or anyone from her past? Would she really have stayed hidden all these years? Jody's case is riddled with theories, some more terrifying than others. 1. She was a runaway. Perhaps Jody found a way to leave town, created a new life, and chose never to look back. The letter sent to her probation officer could suggest this possibility. 2. She met with foul play. If she was last seen walking alone that night, she could have been abducted by someone preying on vulnerable young girls. 3. She was taken by someone she knew. Investigators believe that whatever happened to Jody might have involved someone close to her. The fact that there was no forced entry into any location suggests that if she was harmed, it was by someone she trusted. 4. A connection to drugs or crime. The terrifying ransom calls could indicate that Jody got involved with dangerous individuals who later decided to silence her. More than 3 decades have passed, and Jody Lee Ledkins is still missing. Her mother never stopped looking for her, but sadly, Karen passed away in 2018 without ever knowing the truth. Jody would be in her mid-50s today. There has never been a confirmed sighting, no new letters, no more phone calls. Just a mystery that lingers in the shadows, waiting for someone to finally uncover the truth. Did she run away? Was she taken? Or is she still out there, somewhere, living a life under a different name? Until the day that answer comes, Jody remains frozen in time, a 16-year-old girl who walked down Winchester Avenue one night in 1985 and was never seen again. On the afternoon of June 8, 1988, 9-year-old Scott Kleeschulte left his home in St. Charles, heading down Kin Drive towards West Adams. It was the last day of school, marking the beginning of what should have been a carefree summer. But instead of spending his days riding bikes with friends, playing in the neighborhood, or enjoying his newfound freedom, Scott vanished without a trace. Decades later, his family still wonders, what really happened to Scott that day? St. Charles, a quiet suburban community, was struck by a powerful thunderstorm the day Scott disappeared. The heavy rainfall flooded streets, filled ditches with fast-moving water, and created the kind of chaos that sends children running for shelter. Several witnesses recalled seeing Scott walking before the storm hit. His short brown hair and striped blue shirt were unmistakable as he moved down the familiar streets of his neighborhood. And then the storm came. It passed quickly, but when it cleared, Scott was gone. At first, no one panicked. Scott was an adventurous kid who loved to explore. Maybe he had taken shelter somewhere during the storm and would return home soon. But as minutes turned into hours, concern grew. By nightfall, a full-scale search was underway. Police, volunteers, and search dogs combed the area. Bloodhounds picked up Scott's scent and followed it northeast for about 5 miles along Fox Hill Road. But then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the trail went cold. Authorities scoured nearby tunnels, caves, and creeks. They dredged streams and drainage ditches, hoping to find any trace of Scott. Nothing. As the hours passed, fear set in. One theory emerged early on. Had Scott been caught in a flash flood? The storm that day had been intense, dumping large amounts of rain in a short period. If Scott had been near a drainage ditch or stream when the rain came down, it was possible he had been swept away. But without any remains, without any sign of his body, the theory remained just that, a theory. His parents never believed it. Scott knew the area well. He was not reckless. If he had been caught in rising water, he would have yelled for help, grabbed onto something, tried to get out. But there was nothing, no witnesses, no clothing, no evidence at all. So if the storm didn't take him, then what did? As the days turned into weeks, a darker theory took hold. Scott had been abducted. The idea was horrifying, but made more sense than anything else. If he had drowned, they likely would have found him. But if someone had taken him, that would explain why there was no trace. A stranger? Someone local? Someone who had been watching him? Theories swirled, but no answers came. Scott's family refused to move from their home, hoping that one day he would walk back through the door. But with no leads, no suspects, and no evidence, the case grew cold. Until nearly 20 years later, when the name Michael J. Devlin came into the picture. In 2007, the case of a missing Missouri boy shocked the nation. A 13-year-old named William Ben Ownby had vanished from his neighborhood. 4 days later, police found him, alive, inside the home of a man named Michael Devlin. Even more shocking, another boy was inside Devlin's home. 15-year-old Sean Hornbeck had been missing since 2002, abducted when he was just 11 years old. He had been held captive for over 4 years. When Devlin's story broke, law enforcement immediately questioned whether he could be connected to other missing children. Investigators began looking into cold cases, children who had disappeared without a trace. Scott Kleeschulte's name was on that list. Devlin was known to operate in Missouri. He targeted boys around Scott's age. He had held Sean Hornbeck captive for years, manipulating him, controlling him, keeping him hidden in plain sight. Could Scott have been another one of his victims? A task force was formed to explore the possibility, investigating Devlin's movements and any potential ties to Scott's case. For Scott's family, it was the first real glimmer of hope in nearly 2 decades. But in the end, the investigation came up empty. Authorities could not link Devlin to Scott's disappearance. The task force dissolved. And just like that, the lead was gone. It has now been over 3 decades since Scott Kleeschulte walked down Kin Drive and vanished. His parents still live in the same home, hoping for closure. No remains have ever been found. No arrests have been made. No confessions, no breakthroughs, just silence. There are still two dominant theories. One, that he drowned in the aftermath of the storm, his body somehow never recovered. Two, that he was abducted, taken by someone who knew exactly what they were doing, someone who never intended to be caught. Some believe there is someone out there who knows the truth, someone who saw something that day, something they've kept buried for all these years. Scott was only 9 years old when he disappeared. If he were alive today, he would be in his 40s, a child lost to time, a mystery that still haunts those who loved him. But the biggest question remains, will the truth about Scott Cleeshult ever be found?